Good morning, everybody. We're at the Buddy Holly Center in Lubbock, Texas, and I am with Jackie Bober, the curator here at the center. And Jackie, tell us a little bit about the history of the center. How did the Buddy Holly display end up here at the center?
Okay. In the mid to late 1990s, a large collection of Buddy Holly artifacts were offered at auction. They were purchased by a local businessman who had them on display for a short time at the Museum of Texas Tech University.
Oh, okay.
And they were offered to the city. The city acquired them. And while they were looking for a home to display these artifacts, they were also looking for a larger home for their fine arts center. So they combined the two ventures into one here at the Buddy Holly Center. So in the historic depot portion of the building in which we are sitting now is where I do my fine arts programming. And then in the newly constructed Buddy Holly Gallery is where we have a large portion of the collection of artifacts and memorabilia of Buddy Holly on display. The center opened to the public in September of 1999. So this is our 19th year open, and we just welcome visitors from not only locally and regionally, but from throughout the nation, as well as in far-flung areas of the world. We welcome a lot of visitors from Australia and England, in which there are large contingents of Buddy Holly fans.
Yeah. So what's the significance of Buddy Holly in Lubbock, Texas?
Well, Buddy was born here,
Okay.
born and raised here. He was born here in September of 1936 and grew up here, went to elementary, junior high, high school. After high school, he did hang around the area playing in regional sorts of shows, and then when he started recording and making his presence known on a national basis, Lubbock was always his home base, and while he traveled throughout the country. It wasn't until he got married in 1958 that he stayed in New York City with his new bride and lived there, called that apartment in New York home up until his death.
A long, long time ago, I can still remember how that music used to make me smile. And I knew if I had my chance, I could make those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver. Bad news on the doorstep, I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride. Something touched me deep inside the day the music died.
When you come to the center, start with the video in the theater, because it gives you a really good history of Buddy Holly, and then the balance of the display and is a kind of a walking, self-guided tour history of a lot of what Buddy Holly did. A lot of people don't realize the amount of influence he had on particularly the kind of the British pop rock movement. Paul McCartney was quoted as saying that his first 40 songs of the Beatles were influenced by Buddy Holly. He also influenced many of the British rock bands. He had a 25-day tour.
That's correct, in the UK in 1958, starting at the end of January and going through actually at the end of February going into March. And oftentimes he would play 2 or 3 shows a day.
Yeah.
Very rarely taking a day for rest, but just traveling and getting to the next gig. And so a lot of people saw him. And it was at that time that, 13, 14-year-old John Lennon and Paul McCartney saw him perform on the BBC on a program called Sunday Night at the Palladium. And
sounds a little bit like Ed Sullivan,
yes,
British
exactly.
style, doesn't
yes,
it? Yeah.
And I think that it was actually. He did some other TV appearances while he was there and some radio appearances, but most of them were live. And it's amazing when we welcome visitors from the UK. Some of the older ones actually will have remembered seeing Buddy on TV in their youth. Others are of a later generation. They came to love Buddy Holly and his music through the influence of their parents and grandparents.
See that. A lot of people don't realize he had a very short career, even though he had all of this influence on the British music scene and eventually the American music scene. His professional career was very short-lived.
Essentially 18 months from the time that That'll Be the Day hit the Billboard Top 100 charts and rose to #1. He very short career, but he was never one to waste a lot of time. He wrote and or co-wrote the lyrics and music to nearly 50 songs. And recorded that many. He lived long enough to see a few of them rise to the top of the charts. Many more of them didn't get onto the charts until after his passing.
And he was very creative in trying to create different sounds within his music. He was always stretching the limits. And kind of trying to expand the box, if you will.
Sure, his band was sort of unique in that, it being an early rock and roll band, and served as the model for future bands where you had 2 guitars, a bass player, and a drum.
Right.
But when he was in the studio and producing with the help of Norman Petty, the introduction of a string section or some brass, or a stringed instrument called a celesta, which is played on every day. You will hear it. It's kind of that tinkling music box kind of sound that Mrs. Petty actually played. Never fearful of trying new things. I mean, if you listen to Buddy's entire output of music, no 2 songs are exactly the same. There are driving rhythms, there are Latin rhythms, there are country rhythms, there are black soulful rhythms, always wanting to introduce things. And I think a lot of the time he was influenced by many of the musicians that he played with on tour.
The building that houses the Buddy Holly Center and the Fine Arts display that you had mentioned earlier seems to be a fairly historic building for Lubbock. Is there some background there? Is there some history?
It is actually, the city was thoughtful in repurposing the structure. It was the original home of the Fort Worth and Denver Railway Depot. Built in 1926. It is on the National Register of Historic Buildings. And so for those purposes, we cannot make any alterations to the exterior of the building, but we have to the interior so that we can use it for our fine art displays. It remained a working railway depot up until sometime in the 1950s. And then it was used as warehouse storage for some businesses down here. It was a salvage yard at one time. And then in the 1970s, a gentleman purchased the structure and opened up the depot, restaurant and bar. And so it served its purpose for nearly 20 years as a restaurant and a local gathering place for musicians. And then the city purchased it in the late 1990s.
Well, that'll be the day when you say goodbye. Yes, that'll be the day when you make me cry. You say you're gonna leave, you know it's a lie, 'cause that'll be the day when I die. Well, you give me all your loving and your turtle doving, all your your hugs and kisses and your money too. Well, you know you love me, baby. Still you tell me maybe that someday, well, I'll be through. Well, that'll
If you're ever in Lubbock, Texas, be sure to stop by the Buddy Holly Center. The building itself is beautiful, and the display is just extraordinary. A lot of memorabilia and Americana from Buddy Holly's life. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, have fun living outside the box.